41 minutes before federal agents walked into my father's ballroom, he stood at a microphone in front of 500 people and explained why my name had to come off the family trust. He called me a cost, not a daughter. A cost. My name is Elena Vance. That night I was 48 years old, and I was wearing a charcoal suit I'd bought at a base exchange in Stuttgart 11 years earlier. The lining was starting to separate at the left shoulder. I knew it, and I wore it anyway, because I'd spent the previous 11 months building a case against my own family, and I did not want to walk into that room looking like someone with a plan. The valet took my rental keys without writing anything down. Inside, the Meridian Tower lobby smelled like white lilies and money. There was a step-and-repeat banner with the company logo, a string quartet playing something soft enough to ignore, and a young man at a podium with a tablet. Last name? Vance. He scrolled. Then he did the thing people do when they don't want to say what the screen is telling them, which is scroll again. I'm not finding it. Are you with a corporate table or? Try the family list. He tried the family list. His ears went red. It's fine, I said. Put me anywhere with a chair. My phone buzzed against my hip while he was writing my name on a blank card in ballpoint. One line from a number that wasn't saved. Custodian confirms. Monday 0600, I read it twice. Then I deleted it. The way you delete something you've already memorized. And I put the phone away, and I walked toward the elevators. The Meridian elevators make a particular sound, not a ding. Two soft clicks close together like a door being unlocked twice. My father chose that sound personally in 1996. He told a business magazine it was the sound of a building that knew who you were. That night it let me in without knowing anything at all. The ballroom took up the entire 40th floor. Glass on three sides, Arlington laid out below, the river a black seam through all that light. Vanguard Defense Systems held the Legacy Ball every October. 400 employees, 60 institutional shareholders, 3 former undersecretaries, and enough shrimp to feed a battalion. It was also technically a memorial. The event carried my mother's name. Men like him kept strange things. Diane Vance, the company's family assistance office for 22 years, which is the department that helps a woman in Ohio understand what her husband's benefits look like, now that he's dead. She died 3 years ago. Nobody at the ball mentioned her once, and her name was on the program in 12-point type under the sponsor list. That's the only reason I came. They put me at table 9 against the wall, sharing an air current with the kitchen doors. Every time a server pushed through, the candle flattened. I'd been sitting 8 minutes when my brother found me. Marcus is 39. He has our father's jaw and none of his patience, and he had been chief executive for 2 years and 4 months, which was long enough to start describing the company's founding as we. He was moving through the room with 3 shareholders in tow, the way a man does when he's decided a room is a stage, and he's the only one who knows it. There she is, he said. Ladies and gentlemen, my sister. The 3 of them arranged themselves around the table. One of them shook my hand, the other 2 didn't. Elena's army, Marcus said. Was it army? It was. See, I can never keep it straight. 20-something years, and I still couldn't tell you what she does. He turned to the shareholders. You want to know how the Vance family sends someone to serve their country? We send them to move boxes. Logistics, supply desk. She spent 2 decades doing inventory for the federal government, and then they let her go, and now she consults. He said consults like it was a diagnosis. That's not quite. She's being modest, it's her thing. He leaned in and tapped 2 fingers against his own throat, mirroring the place on mine, where a scar runs about 4 inches under the jawline, pale and slightly ridged. Ask her about that. Everybody assumes combat. Tell them what it actually was, Elle. I looked at him. There is a version of that story. It is short. It is classified in the parts that matter, and there is a man named Daniel Reyes in it who put his hand on my neck and kept it there for 11 minutes. Cargo accident, I said. Marcus spread his hands. Cargo accident. 20 years of cargo accidents. One of the shareholders laughed, the polite kind, the kind that's really an apology. Then Marcus noticed the band on my left wrist. Titanium, flat, 2 centimeters wide. No ornament. The finish gone soft from handling. And that, he said, every time. What is that? A hospital bracelet. Do we need to be worried? It's a bracelet. It's a bracelet. He straightened up, delighted with himself. Enjoy the shrimp, Elle. It's the good kind. They moved on. The shareholder who'd shaken my hand glanced back once, and I watched him decide it wasn't his business. A minute later, a girl in a green dress sat down in the chair Marcus had been leaning on. Sophie, Marcus's daughter. 17. Home from boarding school for the weekend, holding a plate with nothing on it but bread. Aunt Elena, Sophie, I hate these. She set the plate down. Do you want to know how many people have asked me what I'm going to major in tonight? 9. I counted. What are you telling them? Marine biology. I'm not doing marine biology. I just like watching their faces. She picked at the bread. Your suit's nice. It was not a nice suit, and she knew it, and she said it anyway, and it was the only kind thing anyone said to me in that room for the next 2 hours. I have thought about that sentence more than I expected to. Then the lights dropped, and a spotlight found the podium, and my father walked out to applause that he did not acknowledge, because he never has. Richard Vance was 74 that year. He built Vanguard out of a machine shop in Sterling, Virginia, with a Navy contract for connector housings and a second mortgage. And by the time I was in high school, he'd stopped telling that story as history and started telling it as scripture. He is not a loud man. That's the thing people get wrong about him. He gets quiet and the room comes to him. He talked for 6 minutes about the year ahead. He talked about the Kestrel program, which is the positioning and timing module that goes into everything from artillery fire control to medevac routing the little box that tells an American convoy where it is when the satellites are being jammed. Kestrel was 61% of Vanguard's revenue. He said the word sovereign 4 times. Then he said, "Before I let you eat, there's a piece of housekeeping." I remember the exact texture of the silence. People put down their forks, 'cause they thought I was going to announce a merger. The family trust that holds the founding shares of this company was written in 1991, and it was written for a family that no longer exists in that shape. Diane is gone, my son runs the company, and it is my obligation, not my preference, my obligation to make certain that the instrument reflects reality. He paused. Effective before Monday, the trust will be restructured. My son Marcus will hold the founding block. My granddaughter Sophie will be named as remainder beneficiary. Nobody moved. My daughter Elena will be removed as a beneficiary and as a director of record. 500 people turned around to find me at the same time. There is a sound that makes. It's not a gasp. It's fabric. I want to be clear about why, my father said, because in 6 weeks, somebody will print a version of this that isn't true. Elena has never worked a day at this company. She has never sat for a board meeting. She has contributed nothing to what is in this room. For 26 years, she has been a line item in expense this family has carried without comment. And I am not going to leave a controlling interest in a defense company to a person who has spent her adult life being carried. Marcus, at the head table, had stopped smiling. That's the part nobody caught. I caught it, and I filed it, and I did not understand it for another 9 days. My brother, who had spent the entire evening building a small coliseum around me, looked up at our father with emphasis I'd only seen on him once before, at our mother's funeral, when the pallbearer list came out and he wasn't on it. He leaned toward my father's chief of staff and said, "Not quietly enough, Dad." What the hell was that? I had my right hand in my jacket pocket. There was a dog tag in there. It's stainless, and about a third of it is discolored down to a dull brown-black where the heat got to it, and the last 2 digits of the serial are gone. I've carried it for 4 years and 2 months. I could feel the melted edge against the pad of my thumb, and I pressed on it until it hurt, because pain is a very good way to keep your face still. My father never looked at me, not during the announcement. Not after. He looked at the back wall, at the shareholders, at the teleprompter, at his own hands. I want you to remember that, because at the time I thought it was contempt. It wasn't contempt. It was a man who had gotten a phone call at 3:40 that afternoon and was doing the only thing he could think of. Marcus recovered fast. He always did. He got to his feet with a champagne flute and raised it toward the podium, and his voice carried the way it does when a man has decided to be louder than his own confusion. To Dad, he said, for doing the hard thing in public. Glasses went up around the room. Some of them looked at me while they drank, which is a specific kind of cruelty that people don't think of as cruelty because it's silent. The lights went out at 8:41, not the ballroom lights. Everything. 40 floors of building, all at once the chandeliers, the uplights, the glowing Vanguard logo behind the podium, the strip lighting under the bars. The emergency system caught about 2 seconds later and painted the whole floor in that flat white that makes everyone look like they've been in an accident. Then the service doors on the north wall opened. They came in fast and they came in wide, and they did not shout the way people expect. Blue windbreakers with 3 yellow letters, body armor over them. 2 agents peeled toward the elevator bank, 2 toward the stairwell, and a woman in her 50s with gray at her temples walked straight down the center aisle between the tables, like the tables weren't there. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," she said, in a voice pitched to be heard and not to frighten. "Nobody is under arrest. Nobody leaves this floor. Put your phones on the table, screen down." A man near the windows said, "This is a private event." And an agent said, "Yes, sir." And that was the end of the negotiation. I watched the room decide what was happening. You could see it move across the tables like weather. Somebody behind me whispered, "It's the tax thing," with the relief of a person who has decided on the smallest possible disaster. My father did not move from the podium. He put both hands flat on the lectern. Marcus laughed. Actually laughed. One bark of it. And said, "Are you serious? Tonight?" And started walking toward the woman in the center aisle with his hand out like he was going to introduce himself. An agent stepped between them without touching him, and Marcus stopped. I stayed in my chair. Sophie had come back to my table at some point. She had her fingers around the back of the chair, and she was breathing too fast, and she said, "Aunt Elena, what's happening?" "Sit down," I said. "Put your hands where they can see them." "You're not in any trouble, is Dad? Sit down, Sophie." She sat. Across the room, a man in service dress blue came through the north doors behind the last agent. Air Force, silver oak leaves. He was carrying a folded sheaf of paper in his left hand, and he had that particular walk of an officer who has been told exactly how many seconds he has. He stopped in the middle of the ballroom and turned in a slow half circle, scanning. Then he found me at table 9, next to the kitchen doors, in an 11-year-old suit with a plate of shrimp I hadn't touched. He crossed 40 feet of hardwood. He came to a stop 3 paces off, brought his heels together hard enough that people 2 tables away flinched, and saluted. "Ma'am," I stood up and returned it, Lieutenant Colonel. Task Force Meridian reports the Kestrel build environment is contained as of 2038. All 4 repositories are locked. Special Agent Okonkwo has the warrants. He held out the papers. "Ma'am, we had to move tonight. The Bureau will brief you." Somewhere near the bar a glass went over. Nobody picked it up. "Say again the reason for the timeline, Colonel Hahn." "Asset movement, ma'am. 1850 local. Somebody tried to push 4 entities offshore." I felt something behind my sternum go very cold and very quiet, and I said, "Understood." Behind him, the big screen that had been showing the Vanguard logo all night flickered, dropped to blue, and came up on a Department of Defense seal. A woman's face filled it, the Deputy Undersecretary, at a desk in a room with no windows, reading from a page. I'm not going to reproduce what she said. It was 90 seconds of authority language, the kind that is written by 4 lawyers, and improved by none of them. What it amounted to was this: Task Force Meridian was a joint counterintelligence element. It had been operating for 11 months. Its commander was Major General Elena Vance, United States Army. And its subject was Vanguard Defense Systems. A room like that does not go silent and stare in awe. Not a room with 500 people in it and an open bar. It fragments. A woman at table 4 started crying, not because of me, because she had a mortgage, and she had just heard the word suspension of contracting eligibility. 3 people picked their phones back up and were immediately told to put them down. A man I'd never met stood up and said loudly, "To nobody. I want to be on record that I'm outside counsel." Somebody near the windows asked an agent, in a small voice, whether he could go get his coat. Sophie was looking at me like I had changed shape. And at the head table, my brother Marcus was standing with his hand still half raised from the champagne toast, staring not at me, but at our father. I watched him say something. I couldn't hear it. I've since read his own account of it in a proffer session, so I know the words were, "You knew. You knew this afternoon." Richard Vance stood at that podium with both hands flat on the lectern, and he looked out at his ballroom. And for the first time all night, he looked directly at me. And what was on his face was not surprise. That is the moment the story you think you're watching stops being the story you're watching. 4 years and 2 months before that ball, a ground movement in eastern Syria, 6 vehicles. Callsign Sabre. 6 took a route recommended by an assured positioning overlay because the constellation was being jammed and the overlay was what they had. The overlay put them 600 meters east of where they believed they were. 600 meters is nothing. 600 meters is a channel between 2 berms with one way in. 6 Americans did not come home. The senior man was Master Sergeant Daniel Reyes, who had a wife named Nora and a son named Mateo, who was 8 at the time. I signed the movement order. The investigation took 14 months. It could not reproduce the fault. Hardware tested clean. Software tested clean. And when a board cannot find a machine to blame, it eventually writes a sentence about the people. The final report contained the phrase insufficient route discipline at the vehicle commander level. They blamed the dead men for driving where the box told them to drive. I read that report in a conference room in Tampa, and I did not say anything because I did not have anything. Not one thing. I had a feeling in my stomach that a machine had lied, and a feeling is not evidence, and I had signed the order that put them on that road. I carry the tag because Reyes put his hand on my throat in Kandahar in 2014 after a hangar door came off its track, and he kept his hand there and kept talking to me for 11 minutes until the medics got there. And he never once told anyone about it because he thought it might embarrass me. That's the whole reason. There's no better one. Nobody in my family has ever heard that story. They have a different one about me, and it is 26 years older. I was accepted to Wharton at 17. My father framed the letter. He put it on the wall in the Sterling office next to the first Navy purchase order. And for 4 months he introduced me to customers as the one who's going to run the money side. I turned it down for West Point. I did not do it to hurt him. I did it because I had spent a summer interning in my mother's family assistance office, reading files about men whose vehicles ended up in places their maps said were safe, and something in me decided that was the problem I wanted. He did not speak to me for 2 years. By the time he did, the version had already set, and it was the one my brother was still telling at that table 26 years later. My mother tried to correct it exactly once, at a Christmas in 2004, and my father said, "Diane, she moves boxes." And my mother looked at her plate, and that was the last time anyone in my family tried. And here is my part, which I own. I let it stand. Some of it was the work. You cannot explain a joint cyber command billet at Thanksgiving. Most of it was easier than that and uglier. It was pride. I decided that if they couldn't see it, I wasn't going to hold up a light for them. I told myself competence announces itself. Competence does not announce itself. It just gets quieter. For 26 years that cost me a family. Then for 11 months. It was the most useful thing I owned because nobody in that house had ever once asked me what I actually did, which meant nobody in that house ever thought to ask what I could see. 11 months before the Legacy Ball, at 4 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, I was reading an unrelated incident summary out of a different theater. A vehicle system had come up with a firmware load that didn't match the signed baseline. The write-up included the build signature. I had seen that signature before. In the Sabre 6 black box, in an annex nobody read, listed as an anomaly and dispositioned as no finding. It was not a standard build. It came out of a development environment that used a non-standard compiler flag, and that flag was a fingerprint, And I knew the fingerprint because I had grown up hearing my father argue about it at the dinner table in 1994. I sat with that for 9 days. I want to be honest about the 9 days, because I said it out loud later in a room with cameras in it, and I would rather you hear it from me now. I did not spend 9 days verifying. I spent about 4 hours verifying. Men like the other 8.5 days. Sitting in my kitchen at 3 in the morning trying to find a version of the world where the answer led somewhere other than my family's building. On the 9th day, I opened a file and started the referral. My apartment in Alexandria is 900 square feet and has almost nothing in it. One good chair, a photograph of my mother in her office with the phone against her shoulder. A pull-up bar in the hallway doorway I use maybe twice a week. That's where I did most of it. Not in a headquarters. A case that runs toward your own father does not live in a headquarters until it can survive the trip. 11 months of it produced 2 things. A hash. The Kestrel firmware that shipped in the Sabre 6 vehicles carried a build signature that did not exist in Vanguard's declared production environment. It came out of a lab in the Sterling facility that had been formally decommissioned in 2019 and was still drawing power. And a door, because that's what was actually sold. Not the box. Anyone can buy a box, take it apart, and copy it in 18 months. What Vanguard sold was the ability to reach into the box after it was fielded and move it. A controlled offset. Tell it that it's somewhere it isn't. That is worth more than $100 million of hardware, and a buyer will not pay for it on a promise. A buyer wants to see it work. I understood that on a Thursday night in February, sitting in that chair with a legal pad, and I put the pad down and went and stood in the shower with the water off for a while. 600 meters, 6 men, on a live road in a real country against a real unit. It wasn't an accident and it wasn't collateral. It was a demonstration. I opened the titanium band and set it on the arm of the chair. It's a memorial band. Thousands of people wear them. The outside is blank because I had it made blank. The inside has 6 names on it, and under the names it has a date, and behind the plate on the underside there is a hardware crypto key about the size of a fingernail. That key is 1/2. I built the evidence vault under 2-person control on purpose. Not because I distrusted the Bureau, because I have watched what happens to a case that lives inside one chain of command when the case starts to embarrass that chain of command. Files get sealed for reasons that sound procedural. I wanted a version of the truth that could not be closed by anyone who could be leaned on. So I gave the second key to a bookkeeper at a transmission shop in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Nora Reyes had refused to see me twice. Once at the memorial service, where she looked at my rank and walked the other way, and once 18 months later when I drove down and she talked to me through a screen door for 4 minutes and then closed it. I mailed her the key anyway, in a padded envelope, with 1 page explaining what it was and what it would open, and what it would cost her to use it. She never wrote back. She also never sent it back. For 4 years I did not know if she'd thrown it in a drawer or a river. Colonel David Ferreira has been my legal advisor for 6 years, and he tells me the truth in a specific order. What I want to hear, then what I need to hear, then what he'd say if he were braver. He came to my apartment the 2nd week of March, with a folder and a sandwich he didn't eat. "There's an off-ramp," he said. "I want it on the record that I told you about it." "Go ahead. Justice will take a corporate settlement. The company pays a number with 9 digits in it. The company survives. 4,000 people keep their jobs, and the individual conduct stays under seal." He turned the folder around. "Nobody's father is arrested at a ballroom. And you stay a general officer with a career, instead of the woman who put her family in a federal courthouse." In Sabre 6, he was quiet for a second. The 15-6 stands. There's no mechanism to reopen it without the underlying conduct on the public record. "So Reyes stays a man who drove badly." Elena, say it as an answer. "Yes," he said, "Reyes stays a man who drove badly. I have thought a lot about how close I came. It was not close because I love my father. It was close because I am tired, and because there was a version of that spring where I let the lawyers do it quietly, and I went back to work, and nobody in Arlington ever had to look at me. I told him to leave the folder. He didn't. He sat down in the one chair I own, with the folder closed on his knees, and he said, "Say the price out loud. If you can say it, you've already decided, my command." Probably my career, my brother. I stopped because the list kept going and I did not want it to. And some number of people at that plant, in Sterling, who have never heard my name. And what do you get for it? One sentence deleted from a report. He looked at me for a while. Then he put the folder on the table, turned it around to face me, and took the cap off his own pen, which is the only opinion he has given me in 6 years. I signed it standing up because I did not trust myself to do it sitting down. It named Richard Vance and Marcus Vance individually. It went to the Bureau and to Justice with my name on the bottom of it in my own handwriting, and I remember looking at that handwriting and thinking it belonged to somebody much younger than me. It was a Wednesday. Ferreira watched me do it and then took the folder and left without saying anything, which from him is a form of respect. Let me ask you something before this goes where it goes. If you had proof that the person who made you, would be destroyed by it, and if the only people it would help were already dead, would you have signed it? Or would you have taken the quiet version and told yourself the dead don't care? I'm not asking rhetorically. I've never been sure I got it right. They came back at me in 9 days, and they came back better than I expected. My father did not deny anything. That's the thing about him. He has never once, in my hearing, denied a fact. He reframes it, and the reframe is always about somebody's character. A crisis communications firm in the district picked up Vanguard on a Friday. By Tuesday there was a story in a trade outlet. Then a bigger one, and the shape of it was this. A 2-star general had used a federal counterintelligence task force to settle a family estate dispute. Removed from the trust 1 hour, the FBI in the ballroom the next. The timeline practically wrote itself, and it was true, and truth in the wrong order is the most effective lie there is. They had a photograph of me at the ball in that worn charcoal suit. They ran it next to a line about a woman who had waited 26 years. The Bureau went dark, because the Bureau always goes dark. I couldn't say a word. There is no version of me publicly discussing a sealed investigation that doesn't end the investigation. Then the second wave came, and the second wave is the one that actually hurt. Vanguard's contracting eligibility was suspended pending review. That is a normal, correct, procedural thing to do to a defense firm under active counterintelligence investigation, and I would recommend it in any other case in the world. 4,100 people were furloughed in 11 days. I got a letter from a machinist in Sterling, 26 years on the floor. He wrote it by hand and mailed it to a post office box because he couldn't find any other way to reach me, and he did not curse at me, which somehow made it worse. He wrote that he understood I was doing my job. He asked whether anyone had done the math on his job. I still have it. And on a Thursday, 3 reporters and a man with a video camera stood on the sidewalk outside Sophie's school in Middleburg and waited for a 17-year-old to come out of a building. She texted me at 9:40 that night, 4 words. "Are they lying about you?" I looked at that message for a long time. There is no honest answer to it that a child should have to hold. I wrote back, "Some of it is true and told wrong. I'm sorry it reached you." "Don't read the rest." She wrote, "Okay, that was the whole exchange." It is the single worst thing I did to anybody in this entire story, and I did it by being right. The third wave was procedural, and it worked. A member of Congress from a district with a Vanguard plant sent a letter to the Department of Defense Inspector General requesting a preliminary inquiry into the use of Title X assets in furtherance of a personal financial interest. That is not a frivolous request. Read it cold without knowing me, and it is exactly the kind of thing an Inspector General is supposed to look at. If I had received that letter about some other general, I would have wanted it looked at too. The inquiry opened on a Monday. Standard practice while it runs is to remove the officer from the operational chain. On Tuesday the 22nd, I sat in a conference room at Fort Meade and handed over my badge, my task force credentials, and my primary token. My access was flagged pending adjudication, not revoked. Flagged, which is a distinction that matters to lawyers and to nobody else. Task Force Meridian was reassigned to an acting commander, a good officer named Pettigrew, who had the decency to look sick about it. Colonel Hahn walked me out. He wanted to say something, and I told him not to, because whatever he said would go in somebody's notes. I drove off the installation in a rented Corolla. No badge, no command, no title anyone was obligated to use. The elevators in my building make a flat electronic beep. I stood in one for 4 floors that night and thought about 2 clicks, close together, like a door being unlocked twice. And then my father did the thing he does, which is win in public. Vanguard's outside counsel got a temporary restraining order in the Eastern District of Virginia, freezing the civil forfeiture action on the 4 offshore entities. It did not touch the criminal investigation. It couldn't. But that is not what the press release said, and it is not what anyone read. He called an extraordinary meeting of the board of directors for the following Thursday. At 9 in the morning, on the 40th floor of the Meridian Tower, the same room as the ball, with the tables taken out. He opened it to the press, 14 outlets confirmed. On the agenda, item 4, referral of General Elena Vance to the Department of Justice and the Department of the Army for a both position, unlawful diversion of federal investigative resources, and interference with a federally regulated enterprise. And here is the detail that told me everything, and that I should have understood 2 months earlier. Richard Vance was not going to read that item. Marcus was. My father put his own son at the podium to accuse me in front of 14 cameras on a matter that touched export licenses that bore Marcus's signature. Wednesday night, the night before, Nora Reyes called me for the first time in 4 years. I heard a television in the background and a boy's voice asking something about dinner. "There's a man parked at the end of my street," she said. "Been there since 2. He knocked and asked me how I felt about you." "Did you say anything?" I told him to get off my porch. A pause. Her voice went somewhere flatter. "General, I have a 12-year-old. He's got his dad's name on his backpack. Whatever this is you built, do not put my son in it." "I understand, do you?" "Yes." She was quiet for 4 or 5 seconds. Then she hung up, and I sat in a 900-square-foot apartment with no command, no badge, no restraining order of my own, and half of a key. Half of a key opens nothing. I found my brother in the parking structure under the Meridian Tower at 8:50 on Wednesday night, on P2, between a black sedan and a concrete column. He saw me and stopped walking and said, "You've got to be kidding." 2 minutes, I'll call security." "Call them. They'll take 11 minutes to come down here, and I only need 10. I put my hands in my pockets so he could see them go in empty. "Marcus, when did you find out about the trust?" He blinked. "What, the trust?" "The announcement. When did Dad tell you he was cutting me out?" "Why does that? He caught himself. He is not stupid." "He has never been stupid, and that is the tragedy of him." "He didn't. Say it in a full sentence. He didn't tell me." Marcus's jaw worked. "He told me there'd be a housekeeping item. I thought it was the Sterling lease. I found out standing at a head table with 200 people watching my face." He laughed. 1 syllable. "Ugly." "You want me to say it hurt? Fine, it hurt. Congratulations." "What time did he get to the building that day?" "I don't, Elena. What is this?" "What time?" 4. Little after 4. He came in the side and went up to 42, and he didn't come out until the ball. Something moved behind his eyes. There was a call before that. Compliance. Dad's assistant told me not to schedule him after 3:30 because outside counsel was sending something over. 3:40 in the afternoon. Federal notice hand-delivered to corporate compliance, who are obligated to route it to the chairman the same day. 4 hours and 43 minutes later, he stood at my microphone and removed me from the shareholder record in front of 500 witnesses and $14,000 worth of press coverage. Not to humiliate me, to be able to say later, in a courtroom, that I had no financial interest in Vanguard Defense Systems when the forfeiture came down. To move me out of the blast radius of his own asset seizure, and to build in the same motion a public record that I was a bitter woman with a motive. He did both with one speech. He is very, very good. I said, "Marcus, have you ever physically signed a Kestrel export license? Pen in your hand, paper in front of you." He opened his mouth, he closed it. They come to me digitally, he said. Through the authority block, legal packages them and it applies my, he stopped. He looked at the concrete floor of his own parking garage. It applies my signature. Who administers the authority block? The chairman's office. We stood there. Somewhere above us a car alarm went off and stopped. You're lying, he said, but he said it the way you say a prayer you stopped believing in. I'm going to be in that room tomorrow, I said. You're going to read a statement he wrote for you. I'd like you to notice, while you're reading it, that he's not the one reading it. I walked away and he didn't follow me and he didn't call security. I drove to Fayetteville that night, 5.5 hours. I got there at 3 in the morning and slept 90 minutes in the car, outside a transmint shop and waited for the lights to come on. Nora Reyes opened at 6:40. She was in a fleece and she had a coffee and she saw me standing by the bay door and did not look surprised, which told me she'd been expecting me since the phone call. No, she said, okay, you drove 5 hours to here, no? I drove 5 hours because you deserved to say it to my face instead of a phone. She sipped her coffee and looked at the parking lot for a while. I took the dog tag out of my pocket and held it out. The burned one. I had never shown it to her. I had rehearsed showing it to her about 400 times in 4 years, and had never once gotten as far as the driveway. That's his, she said. It was not a question. They gave it to me in Tampa. It should have gone to you. She didn't take it. She looked at it in my palm the way you look at a photograph of an accident. Why do you have it? Because I signed the order that sent them down that road, I said. And I wanted to keep something that made it hard to stop thinking about. The wind moved through the lot. A truck went by on the road. 4 years, Nora said. Everyone who's talked to me about Danny has led with how sorry they are. You know what nobody's ever done? She turned and looked at me straight on for the first time since the memorial. Nobody's ever answered the question. Ask it. Did my husband screw up? No, I said. Somebody moved the map under him on purpose to prove to a customer that they could. Your husband drove exactly where the equipment told him he was. The report is wrong, and I can prove the machine lied, and I cannot prove it without the thing I mailed you 4 years ago. Nora Reyes stood in the door of a transmission shop in North Carolina at 10 to 7 in the morning and did not cry because she was done with that years ago. She said, Mateo's got a game Saturday, I'll need to be back Friday night. Then she went inside to get her coat. The 40th floor without the tables looks enormous. They'd set a long table across the north glass for the directors, a lectern at the near end, and 40 chairs for press that were all full by 8:40. 2 networks had cameras on tripods. Somebody had put out coffee in Vanguard-branded cups, which is a detail I think about sometimes. I came up in the elevator with Nora and a federal prosecutor named Elena Vance, no relation, which he said twice, and special agent in charge Ruth Okonkwo, who spent the ride reading her phone and said exactly one thing to me. You understand that if this goes sideways, I did not authorize it. Understood, and that I'll say so, you should. One more thing, she still hadn't looked up from her phone. Nothing on that drive is ours. The hash comparison is your work product. The payment records are in the forfeiture pleading, filed, unsealed, public since April. And that compliance call belongs to Vanguard. Elliot Sung kept his own copy for 4 years and handed it to a lawyer, not to me. I know. I'm saying it out loud so that when somebody puts me on a stand and asks whether the Bureau walked a general into a board meeting, I can answer it in 1 syllable. The doors opened, 2 clicks, close together. My father was already seated at the center of the director's table. He did not look at me. 9 of the 11 directors were there. The general counsel was at the far end with a stack of paper. A process server met me 4 steps in and handed me the TRO, and a photographer got that, and it ran everywhere for a week. Marcus was at the lectern. He read for 6 minutes. It was a good statement, controlled, more sorrowful than angry, which is always the right choice. He described a sister who had disappeared from the family for 2 decades and reappeared with a badge. He used the word weaponized twice. He said that Vanguard would be requesting a criminal referral and that the family would cooperate fully with the Inspector General. He did not look at our father once while he read it. When he finished, the board chair, a retired admiral named Coyle, who had known my mother, said, "Does anyone wish to be heard?" I stood up. 8 minutes, I said. "General, I'm not a general in this room, sir. I've been relieved pending inquiry. I have no badge and no authority here. I'm a person who was on the shareholder register until 3 weeks ago." I looked at Coyle. 8 minutes. He looked at the cameras and at my father, and he made the decision that ended Richard Vance's life's work. 8 minutes. I did not defend myself. People who have watched the clip since think that I did. The first thing I said was the worst thing about me. 11 months ago, I identified a build signature in the firmware that shipped in 6 vehicles that were destroyed in Syria. I knew within 4 hours what it meant. I did not file for 9 days. I spent those 9 days trying to construct a version of the facts that did not lead to this building, because my father owns it. The room made a sound. That was misconduct. It's in the inquiry file. I put it there myself. If you want a reason to distrust me, use that one. Because it's real, and the ones in my brother's statement aren't. Then I stopped talking about myself. "Admiral, I'd like to introduce Mrs. Nora Reyes." She came up the center aisle in a navy jacket she'd bought the night before in a Kohl's off I-985. 12 cameras turned to follow a bookkeeper from Fayetteville and had no idea what they were looking at. We stood on either side of the credenza with the display controller. She took a key out of her jacket pocket. I unfastened the titanium band and turned it over and pressed the plate off with my thumbnail. "Two-person control," I said. "Neither of these opens anything alone." I set it up that way 4 years ago, so that no one, including me, could bury what's in it. We inserted them at the same time. What came up on the screen was not a smoking gun. There is no such thing. There is a ladder, and you climb it 1 rung at a time, and every rung is boring, and the boring is what makes it hold. The first rung was 2 hexadecimal strings side by side. On the left, the build signature recovered from the Sabre 6 vehicle recorder, sitting in an annex of a 14-month investigation that concluded no finding. On the right, the signature from a decommissioned development environment in the Sterling facility that had never stopped drawing power. They matched. A forensic engineer from the Defense Cyber Crime Center walked the room through why a compiler flag is a fingerprint. It took him 4 minutes, and it was the least dramatic 4 minutes of the morning, and it was the whole case. The second rung was money. 11 payments, 3 years, a ceramics company in Singapore with 1 employee who had never been to Singapore. 3 entries into the United States by a foreign national, each within 6 days of a facility review on the chairman's calendar. The third rung was the export licenses, 4 of them bearing the electronic signature of Marcus Vance, Chief Executive Officer. And then the administrative log behind them, who applied that signature, from what terminal, under whose delegated authority. 4 for 4, the chairman's office, 2 of them at times when Marcus Vance was demonstrably on an airplane. I heard my brother's chair move. The 4th rung was a phone call. Vanguard, like every cleared defense firm, records its internal compliance line. There's a notice at the start of every call. It is the most lawful recording in the United States of America. 18 months before Sabre 6, a program manager named Elliot Sung called that line because he had found an undocumented service path in a fielded Kestrel build, and he was frightened. The call was routed to the chairman. They played 31 seconds of it. My father's voice fills a room even on a bad speaker. He did not shout. He asked 2 clarifying questions, and then he said the sentence that is now on a Justice Department exhibit list. "Close the ticket. Tell them it's a demonstration." Nobody in that room understood it for about 2 seconds. Then the forensic engineer, who was still standing at the screen and who had been up for 30 hours and had no idea what he was walking into, said, "Ma'am, a demonstration of what?" The offset was pushed live. And I said, "Yes, it was. I have never heard a room like that." It wasn't silence. It was 40 people realizing at slightly different speeds what a product demonstration means when the product is the ability to move an American convoy 600 meters. Nora Reyes was standing 4 feet from me with her hands at her sides. Somebody's phone rang and nobody answered it. Marcus stood up. He looked at the screen. He looked at the administrative log with his own name on it and somebody else's hands. Then he turned and looked at our father, and I watched 39 years reorganize themselves behind his face. He did not apologize to me. He has never apologized to me, and I don't expect it, and I'd frankly be suspicious of it. He turned to Okonkwo and said, "I want a lawyer, and then I want to talk." Ruth Okonkwo took 11 seconds to cross the room. 2 agents came in through the service door. The chair of the board of directors of Vanguard Defense Systems stood up so fast his water glass went over, and nobody made a joke about it, because it wasn't that kind of room. They arrested my father at 9:51 in the morning at the north end of a table he had commissioned in 1998. He did not resist. He stood and he buttoned his jacket, which he has done before every difficult conversation of his life, and he looked past the agents at me. "It was supposed to be a bench test," he said. "Not I'm sorry. Not you don't understand." He wanted the record corrected on the one point that mattered to him, which was that he had not intended it to be on a road. I said, 6 men. Elena, 6 men. You call that a bench test? They took him out through the service corridor and down in the freight elevator, because the main bank was full of press, and I did not follow. Sophie was standing by the elevator lobby with her coat still on. Somebody's assistant had brought her up from the lobby, not knowing what was about to happen. She had watched all of it. She was Entine Mars. She was 17 years old, and she had just watched her grandfather be arrested and her father surrender to the FBI in the same 90 seconds, and there was not a version of that morning where I could have protected her from it. And I've made my peace with that about 70%. She said, "Is my dad going to prison? Probably. Less than he would have. Because of you? Because of him. He made a choice this morning. It was the right one, and it was late." I put my hand on her arm. "Sophie, none of this is a debt you're carrying. Do you understand me?" She nodded, and she didn't believe me, and that's fine. She's got time. 11 weeks later, Richard Vance was indicted on 12 counts, including conspiracy to violate the Arms Export Control Act and unlawful transmission of defense articles to a foreign agent. Trial is set for next spring. He has retained excellent counsel and intends to fight it, and he may well win a count or two, and I have stopped tracking it daily. Marcus pleaded to 2 felonies and is cooperating. His statement runs 406 pages. He will serve time. He was not the mastermind, and he was also not a bystander. He ran a company that made him rich on a product line he never once asked a hard question about, and there is a name for that, and the name is not innocent. The civil forfeiture went through in August. 4 entities, a building in Sterling, and a number I'm not going to say out loud because it stops sounding like money and starts sounding like a score. At my request, a request in writing, which is the entire extent of my authority over any of it, Justice directed the distribution to the 6 families of Sabre 6, and to a fund that pays for long-term care for catastrophically injured service members. The fund is administered by people who have never met me. Vanguard Defense Systems was debarred from federal contracting for 3 years. About 2,900 of the 4,100 jobs came back within 7 months. Not all of them. I know exactly which plant didn't reopen, and I know the machinist who wrote me is 58 years old and looking, and no part of this is a clean win. In September, they took the name off the Meridian Tower. It took a crane and most of a Sunday. The Inspector General closed the inquiry in October. Not substantiated, with a paragraph about the 9 days that will follow me for the rest of my career, and should. They have not given me my command back. There's a process. It's slower than an exoneration, and it runs through people who now know I am a woman who will refer her own father. Some of them find that admirable, some find it alarming. Both are reasonable. So I'm at a desk at Fort Meade writing doctrine on supply chain assurance, which is extremely boring and will save lives in 11 years, in a way nobody will ever trace back to a document. That's the job. That was always the job. On the 14th of November, the Army published a supplemental finding to the Sabre 6 investigation. It's 4 pages, most of it is exhibit references. Page 3 contains the only part that matters, which is that the phrase insufficient route discipline at the vehicle commander level is withdrawn, and the causation is reassigned to a compromised positioning load introduced by a supplier. One sentence, deleted. That's what 11 months and a family bought. I drove down to Fayetteville the weekend it posted. Nora had it printed out on the kitchen table, with the relevant lines marked in yellow highlighter, which is somehow the most military thing I have ever seen a civilian do. Mateo Reyes is 12, he is tall for it and shy about being tall. He was doing homework at the end of the table, and he looked up at me exactly once, when his mother said my name, and then he went back to it, and that was correct and I was glad. I put the burned tag on the table next to the printout. That should have been yours in 2022. Nora looked at it for a long moment. Keep it, she said. Nora, you keep it. She pushed it back across the wood with 2 fingers. You had it 4 years, and you never once told me a story about my husband that made you look good. Not one, everybody else did. She folded the printout in half. Keep the tag. Come at Christmas. Mateo doesn't need to know why for another few years. I said okay, because there was nothing else to say, and I drove north. And somewhere around Richmond, I had to pull into a rest area for about 10 minutes, and then I kept driving. Sophie deferred a year. In February, she mailed me a course catalog. Mailed it. On paper. In an envelope. Which I think was the point. One line was circled. It was not marine biology. I didn't write back anything clever. I wrote back, good. I saw my father once more, at the arraignment from the 4th row. He turned around in his chair before they seated the jury pool and found me, and he held it for maybe 3 seconds, and he did not say anything, and neither did I. That's the whole reunion. There isn't a better scene coming. I'm not going to invent one for you, because the last thing this needs is a fake ending where the old man weeps, and the daughter forgives him on a courthouse step. Here's what I actually got. I did not get my father. I didn't get an apology, or a moment where he looked at the room and finally saw what I'd been doing for 26 years. And I want to tell you honestly that I stopped wanting that somewhere around the 3rd week of the crisis campaign, and the not wanting was the actual relief. It's very quiet when you put that down. I got a corrected document. I got 6 names moved from one column to another, from men who made a mistake to men who were used. I got a 12-year-old who will grow up and pull his father's file someday, the way sons do, and read a true thing. I still wear the band. 6 names on the inside where nobody sees them, which is the correct place for them, because they were not carrying it for an audience, and neither am I. And I keep the tag in my left jacket pocket, and about once a month my thumb finds the melted edge, and it doesn't mean what it used to mean. For 4 years it meant you signed the order. Now it means the record is right. That's not peace. People say the best revenge is peace. I don't believe them. I didn't get peace. I got accuracy. 6 men can't ask for anything. Accuracy is the only thing left that anybody can hand them. And it turns out you can go and get it, even when the person standing in the way built the house you grew up in. If someone in your life has decided who you are and stopped checking, I'd like to hear about it. Comment sign if you'd have filed the referral against your own father. Comment CL'd if you'd have taken the quiet deal and let the dead stay wrong. There's no correct answer. I've argued myself into both of them at 3 in the morning. And if you know someone whose record was written by people who weren't there, share this with them. Subscribe if you want the next one, because there's always a next one, and the file is never as closed as they tell you it is.